Hello, and welcome back to the Sitecore Developers Hangout series. Today we're talking about Sitecore8, and most specifically Sitecore 8.1 that we have just announced. So it's been a while since we chatted. Welcome back, everyone. We are back and better than ever. We have some familiar faces that we'll introduce everyone to. Or excuse me, familiar faces to get reacquainted with, and some new folks that we can introduce. Folks that we remember from last time, Alex Sheba out in the west coast of USA. We have Alistair joining us from Australia.
Hey guys.
And Kern, are you in Denmark today?
No, I'm in the UK.
In the UK, there we are. That's where we are today. And I think Ryan's on the road, so he doesn't have camera, but Ryan Donovan is here with us. Hey, Ryan.
No, I'm actually in the home office in Seattle, just having camera difficulties.
I was trying to lessen the fact that we're having enough of the difficulty. Just kidding. Todd Mitchell, welcome, joining us from Copenhagen. So Todd and Ryan, welcome, and Kern. And so we've got a fun agenda today. If folks haven't caught the news yet, we did launch 8.1. And so we'll be introducing some of the 8.1 pieces today, but also hopefully soliciting your input for what you'd like to see in future Hangouts. So we'll start with what to expect when we see 8.1 on the release today. That'll be up on SDN. That'll be up on your partner sites. Should have been up as of about, I believe, 5:30 Pacific this morning. Quick screen check is, can you see these screens, gentlemen? The slides?
Looks good.
I see the slides, yes.
Great. So, very quickly, some housekeeping. If you have comments, questions, shoot them in on the hashtag Sitecore8 on Twitter. I've already started a few already this morning, and we've actually already got some questions. So feel free to look there. The Hangout will be available on the YouTube links forever until we take it down. So very quickly, what is the experience platform? It's a term maybe we haven't been introduced to yet. So just what is 8.1, and what are we talking about? What does it mean to us as a development community? Today we're going to do a quick flyby, a breadth over depth overview to really, again, drive some input. What is it you guys would like to see for the upcoming Hangouts? But we definitely have the all-star cast on hand to share some good detail. So before I do that, though, what I want to mention, we have a stellar cast on, folks that you probably already know, and some new folks we'll get to know a lot better over the next few Hangouts. But we certainly would like to mention, especially on launch day, that there's a lot of folks behind this release. We've been at it throughout the summer and throughout the fall, and we want to give a thanks to everyone that has contributed to this release, everything from the first bit of research to it all the way to making these Hangouts possible and getting the product online today. There's a lot of people behind it. Folks here we have represented, they each have members on their team. So big shout out to what we are very proud of as the 8.1 release today. So in a nutshell, you'll see a couple new terms coming out. Today we're just going to focus on what they mean to us as a development team. Experience management we'll refer to, and you may have referred to, be used to knowing it as the core framework and the content management system. And really when we talk about the experience platform now, that's going to be all encompassing. It's going to include XDB. That's also going to include marketing features. So future Hangouts, other things you will see in 8.1 today, that you'll read about in 8.1 in the release. We'll read about enhanced personalization. There's some priority we can put into personalization now to say prioritize more recent behavior depending on device. If someone's mobile, maybe we want to ignore their past price sensitivity. They're in a rush. We have mobile integration. Things that were services that came from third parties are now embedded in the product. Context marketing capabilities. You hear this term a lot in 8.1. It's a step forward in context. So now that we have things like mobile integration, device, and GeoIP location in the core product, that takes us a big step forward in the context of a customer, in the context of their experience. The one connected platform, we have commerce and experience fully connected, something we're very excited about. Folks that have been exposed to the experience profile will be excited to see all of the commerce behavior, all of the commerce attributes now added to the timeline, now added to your experience profile. And the same is also true of the products. The products themselves have a timeline, and the products themselves have a profile. Also updates to FXM. So this was a long way of saying these are rich topics that we'd like to hear from you, what you'd like to see in follow-up Hangouts, and we won't be talking much more about them today. So the gang has a whole list of other things we will be talking about. We wanted to cover these off just to make sure that you guys knew and had some background for what you were seeing in the release today. So, actually, I think I need to jump back to the slide. Sorry about that. I got a few more. So first, we just want to introduce the terminology because there is often sometimes a bit of sync catch-up that we need between what comes into the release and then what folks are used to referring to the product as. So for our purposes, and thank you, Todd, for laying this out, when we look at content delivery and content authoring, that's when we're talking about experience management. Okay, so this is people building experiences, building mobile web experiences, and serving them and delivering them to community or to the visitors. And now when we talk about things like collecting experiences into XDB, when we talk about, say, processing them for analytics or processing them for optimization and personalization and reporting, now we're talking about things at the experience database level. These together all, of course, form what's known as the experience platform. So when you see these new terms today, refer back to this if you need to, or jot it down. It's a good and handy rule of thumb to sort of, as we adopt the new terminology into some of our old workings. And so to explain a lot of what's new in 8.1, I'm going to introduce Kern, I believe is up first. And he's going to take us through some more of the detail on specifically the experience management and the core framework CMS. Go away, Kern.
Super. So let me just see. How do I get cam control over here?
On the left, you'll see a green button for screen share.
Yep, there we go. Cool. There we go. Do you see this? Yep.
Clear.
Do you guys see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Cool. Your deck. Right. So under the core framework and CMS, you can see we've got loads of new stuff, and I guess these high-level things doesn't justify all the work that's gone into 8.1. The general theme for the things that we put into 8.1 has been dealing with, I guess, adoption blockers. So moving, the things that got in the way for people to move to 8. And let's just have a look at some of the detail of some of these things. So we have now something in 8.1 called CMS only mode. So basically experience management or CMS without XDB. To do this, we've had to rearrange our configuration ever so slightly to have a better granularity of how we control this. There are also some license implications that we're looking at here. Cool. Next up, this is one that is very close to my heart. So Sitecore has an excellent MVC offering, and in 8.1 we've done a little bit extra to try and align with MVC, so ASP.NET MVC. One of the big ones that we took off the list was MVC Areas. And we introduced area support on layouts, controller renderings, and view renderings. So we do realize that there are other controllers where we should be able to control areas on, but this portion here probably takes off 90% of the use cases. We do want to expand on this in 8.2, but this is really a great solution that we've baked into 8.1, and it's based on discussions and feedback we've had with the community. I guess for this specific feature, a big thanks to the MVC expert panel. They've been a really big help to get this together. In MVC, we also have some other things that we put into this release. So we updated to the latest MVC release, and in there we should see some very good Razor performance improvements. And this is, of course, just courtesy of Microsoft updating MVC. And some smaller things like better support for HTML data attributes, and we also did some work on the dependency injection story to see if we could alleviate this. And much of the things that we touched came off our user voice, the community user voice that we have for MVC.
And they are certainly they are populous, loud, and well respected. It's something we've heard a lot, certainly since my time here, and very glad to have this in the product. So Kern, thank you to the community, and again the panel and the folks that made it happen. This is a big step forward. I'm sure John West is somewhere, hopefully shaking his hands over his head in excitement.
He's opening the champagne. So we also have done some work on Experience Editor, and one of the big things here has been performance, and also we've had some bugs in there. The one that everyone was asking me about was jQuery, and that's sorted out now. Also, of course, adding in more functionality, and especially around the version layouts to bring it on par with what we have in the sort of device manager. Just see here, next up. Cool, yes, Speak. So in 8.1 we have Speak 2 included, and Speak 1.1, and Speak 1.1 is there for backwards compatibility, and we have of course done bug fixes around Speak 1.1, but we've put a lot of effort into Speak 2, and some cool stuff there, and this is this is put in place for us to start adopting this for the future. And I guess if you are a brave, adventurous dev, you should jump in and check out all the Speak 2 stuff. It's super cool. It is not backwards compatible. I guess that's the only thing to note on that. But check it out. And let me just check my list here. I think I've got one more. That's it for me.
Thank you, sir. We may come back to you though, so don't go anywhere. Next up, I think Alistair, are you going to walk us through the changes in WebDB?
Yep, I'll take that. Okay, can you see my slide?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Okay, so changes that we've introduced into publishing targets. This actually arrived in 8. And the main reason for this was we needed to support how content testing was working with the automatic content version testing. So it used to be an old adage in the Sitecore, the master DB contained all versions of all EP content items, and the web DB or any publishing target only contains the latest version. Not completely true anymore as of 8. You can have multiple versions per item in a publishing target now. At the moment, only items under test, and only items that have a content test on them. So this is where you're comparing one version of the item to another. So when we were designing this feature, we did take into consideration a couple of solutions. This was the one that worked the best. Okay, whenever we tried to have a separate item, when it was supposed to be acting like the original item, there were always going to be issues with position in the content tree hierarchy. and other things like that. So this is the solution that worked the best with the least number of hassles. And I suppose we can, a testament to how little issue this was introduced is the fact that you guys have been using it since 8 was released, and no major issues since, so all good. This is done through the new publish version pipeline. So publish version is used every time a single version of an item is published, and you can hook into that pipeline to play, change, tweak that version as it goes through the pipeline. Okay, next slide, Web.config changes. So probably the biggest change, most notable change in 8.1 is the fact that we've extracted the entire Sitecore section out of Web.config and stuck it into its own config file. Oh, this has been a huge achievement. So let's cover why we did this. Web.config was very near the size limit that you're allowed to have for a Web.config file for an ASP.NET application. I believe the maximum limit is 250K. And last I looked, we were sitting at 238, and that was not with extra things in there. So we're getting very close to the limit. But in my view, a bigger part of this was just extracting the default Sitecore platform configuration out to its own location to try to encourage people to use the auto-include configs, the config patching system. The config patching system in Sitecore is really cool. There is pretty much nothing inside the Sitecore node that you cannot change through patching. So you can add nodes, you can remove nodes, you can change attributes, you can do all that stuff. Realistically, there's no need to go and change Sitecore configuration inside the configuration file. What this also does is it frees up Web.config again, so it's quite, yes, you can add Web.config into your source control and solution. You can go and start tweaking that. The Web.config file didn't just contain Sitecore configuration, of course, it contains everything else for the application. Depending on what you're using, you may need to tweak that, so having this architecture is a lot nicer. We did some impact analysis, so of course we asked our valuable MVPs, and almost exclusively had positive feedback. I'd be really surprised at the person that said no. Yeah, quite happy this is in there. And we've got a couple of extra pipelines. So we've actually got many more pipelines than this, new pipelines in 8 and 8.1. This is kind of just the highlight reel, if you like. The initialized managers pipeline is a new one in 8.1. So we used to have just a single initialized managers processor in the initialized pipeline. And now we've got a separate pipeline to execute all of these things. So this allows parts of the platform and also other developers to tweak those where required. The get field value pipeline, this is a brand new one, and that controls how item field values are retrieved. So for example, pulling out the standard value, pulling out the default value, getting the value from the item itself. So we've now got that ability to tweak that through configuration, which is quite nice. Get field label, this is used to draw or render the label onto the content editor surface. So you know how you get the field name and then in square brackets you get standard value or default value or whatnot. You can now tweak those yourself as well. The get layout source fields pipeline, this builds up the presentation for an item based on the fields of the item. So in 8 we introduced versioned layouts and shared layout. So this pipeline is now used to read the fields as required. So it reads the final renderings field and the shared renderings field. We've got a whole new pipeline group, the item provider. So the standard out-of-the-box item provider is now pipeline enabled. So there are so many small little behaviors that you might want to tweak. For example, get item, get template, things like that. Of course, with some of these things, you've got to be extremely careful with customizations because one wrong move and you can render your site very slow. The last 3 pipelines listed here, these are all UI kind of things, mainly put in there for content testing. Trying to explain what some of these are is a little bit difficult, so let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. So that first one, the render rule placeholder after action. That allows you to insert components into the rule placeholder of the rule set editor. What am I talking about? Let's go and have a look at the presentation of an item. Okay, let's come in here. I've got a personalized item here. Let's go into the renderings. Let's check out the personalization on that. Okay, so this is the rule set editor. This is a rule placeholder, one of those rules. And as you can see, we've got some extra things that you wouldn't have seen, the reach and the effect. So these are injected by the content testing component. They're not enabled by default. You have to go into the config file to enable them. Or, sorry, you have to create a new config patch file to enable them. But we do that through that new pipeline. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I say that. The render device editor rendering. So in the device editor, I've actually got a nicer one that I'd like to show you over here. Okay, so when you're having a look at the layout details, this is called the layout grid. That's the last pipeline I'll talk about. When you enter one of these, when you edit the presentation, this is the device editor. So in here, again, the content testing component, I keep talking about content testing because that was my main project for 8 and 8.1. We wanted the ability to show in these views when there were MV tests applied to renderings. So we've had the blue personalization indicator for a while. We've now got the red testing indicator as well. So you can see this one has a test on it. You can see the test there. And of course this one, the old familiar one, that's the personalization rules. Let's get out of there quick. So those are the new pipelines. Back over to you, Nate.
Very helpful. And certainly just noticing as you're clicking through them, the UI treatment looks like it's gotten a nice facelift, and like you said, you've been deep in the optimization for some time, so well done. And yeah, that third last pipeline I think is my personal favorite, but we'll talk more later. Next up, we've got Mr. Shiba is going to talk us through one of the most popularly requested features we've had as language fallback. And I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, but this is when folks want to set a default language, say, in regions that have multiple Tier 1 languages, say Quebec in Canada, or say Benelux in Europe. Alex, take it away.
That's right. Thanks, Nate. My screen's coming up okay, guys?
Yep, all good.
Oh, cool. Thanks. So as Nate mentioned, language fallback, for those of you who haven't worked with this tool, this is a supercharger for multilingual solutions. So it allows you a great deal of reuse of language versions for your items or your fields. So think about it where you want to set up some fallback rules and essentially just have runtime language versions in any language, reusing all of its data or partially some of its data from a master language. So that promotes the reuse, reduces the footprint of your content items on the database. And the idea has been around the block for a while now. So there's been 2 shared source modules, then it was combined into one. Now the ideas and concepts are pretty much reused from the shared source module. So that means that the logic has been greatly reworked, very much optimized. So there's less price to pay for this runtime item resolution and field resolution. But both item and field level fallback modes are still in play. But I would say right now this is a truly first-class citizen where both authoring apps, content editor, and experience editor respect and help user by instrumenting all of the little field UIs, version dropdowns with a proper information about the fallback behavior, right? So it's not as sort of silent and behind the curtain sort of feature for the business users. And it also works with indexing, meaning that if you heavily rely on content search index, all of the values that are coming out from the fallback from the data API with the fallback behavior, they will be indexed the same way for consistency. And I would say a major gap in the shared source project was the lack of docs, and that was greatly patched by the community, and this has been addressed right now.
Real
so
quick,
the docs
Alex.
will be out there.
Yeah,
Yes.
real quick. That's one of the questions we've got in on Twitter. So again, if you have folks have questions, hashtag Sitecore8. Send them in. But that was one of the questions was where have we updated documentation? So as Alex just mentioned, it's certainly been updated in Fallback, and other folks, as you go through a few note areas of increased doc, just mention it to the viewers. Thanks.
Cool. And I just want to mention a couple of things here, sort of related feature to Fallback, but not necessarily a core Fallback characteristic is this enforcement of version presence. So now per item or per template you can say that let Sitecore make sure that the version of the item is present, so it cannot return an empty version if there is another language on that item already been published. So if you remember some issues with $name popping here and there on the multilingual solution, so now as a business user you have a control over which items would not have this behavior. So at the very core level for developers, this means that a null will be returned from the database instead of an empty version. So that means less work to do on the API front to enable that. And there was one of the Hangout planned around language fallback, and I'll dive much deeper into how it's built. It was using some of the new pipelines that Al introduced. So there will be 1 or 2 sessions on this feature. And then finally, I want to make sure that this is communicated, because there was some really necessary fixes around scalability and performance that were ported into 8.1 from latest 7.2 and 8.0 updates. So you sort of get that for free if you start using 8.1 right now, or if you migrate over. That means faster links database, which been a hotspot for a lot of folks I talked with. The indexing and publishing related issues, especially with the parallel mode enabled. A lot of fixes around index update strategies, that sort of thing. So a lot of those, high visibility, and especially for bigger installations, those issues were addressed as well, which is a great thing. I think that's it for me. Back to you, Nate.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And again, just another note, hashtag Sitecore8 if for questions, because we've had one come in on docs. We've had a couple other coming in, which we'll address at the end. But certainly that language fallback, and as Alex mentioned, fixes and improvements. Focused improvements are across the board in 8.1. So we've got a lot of input from our MVPs and from our partners that help with that. So keep that input coming. And again, ask any questions to see what's made it in. So next up, we are going to move to Todd, and Todd's going to talk about XDB. He is our XDB expert, and we're welcoming him with great enthusiasm to the Sitecore8 Hangout cast. Todd.
Great, thanks, Nate. So, yeah, let's just dive into some of the new capabilities we've introduced, as well as updates within XDB and the Marketing Foundation in general. So 2 major areas we improved was the ability to personalize based on the historical behavior of a contact. I've got a couple slides on those, so I'll save the details. We also introduced venue tracking, which is the ability to collect interactions happening in a physical location. So that means within our marketing taxonomy that you can find in the marketing control panel, there's a new taxonomy node called venue. It's hidden by default, so just log in as admin and turn it on. And we also introduced some rules to be able to personalize based on the venue. From the reporting perspective, our tools like Experience Analytics, those have not taken advantage of the reporting capabilities of venue tracking, but you can use this today to start to personalize on where contacts are physically located. We've made some updates to the interaction registry as well. This was originally introduced in 8.0, and we've made some updates in 8.1. Essentially, the interaction registry allows you to register or create interactions happening outside of a web session. So effectively, you could track an interaction happen on a mobile device, make an easy HTTP call to your delivery environment, which then interacts with the interaction registry and creates a full-fledged offline interaction, which behaves much like a web interaction, but doesn't require you to have a full session. Updates in our data store capabilities. As of Update 5, and of course continuing with Update 1, we've introduced support for Mongo 3.0, and also a place to plug in new credentials for Mongo, and I'll speak more about those in a moment. So let's dive into the historical personalization features we've added. The first one of two is the ability to personalize on a context behavior profile. If you're already familiar with our behavior profiling features in today's or in the 8.0 world, we could collect a behavior profile, such as what their interest is, what kind of car they're interested in, and all of those types of profiles during the interaction, and we could personalize on what's happening during that interaction. Well, as of 8.1, we're able to collect and merge this at the end of each interaction or each web session for the contact. Now, the logic behind this is probably more around 30 minutes of discussion, so we should probably save the details for another Hangout. But this is a simple feature that you can use to pick up an interaction from where the previous one's left off. And that's the contact behavior profile feature. We ship with, of course, personalization rules that allow you to personalize based on the contact behavior profile or the interaction session in and of itself. And one other small note on this feature, at the beginning of each interaction, we're able to decay what happened in the previous interaction by a percentage. You can see it highlighted there in the screenshot. And that, of course, allows us to vary the amount of importance we give on previous interactions.
And so this is, I think, what we teased out a little bit. Todd's really skimmed over some really exciting stuff so far, things like the session that he mentioned with the tracking, but also here when we're talking about decay, this is something we talk about, or we probably see a lot as consumers, where I bought a gift for someone, and it was a gift, and it then becomes part of everything they advertise towards me, or something that they give me specials for, and it was a one-time gift, or in my case, I've got children, they grow up, right? So something that was a size 4 this week is going to be a size 5 next week. So this is the type of thing where we can use, in this case, decay or prioritization to say, well, maybe we want to prioritize something like venue that Todd mentioned. If we know someone's in a retail location, or if we know someone has purchased an item, or through commerce, we know someone has added something to their cart, we want to prioritize those things perhaps more so than behavior that we did however long ago. Is that about right, Todd?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And actually, our first implementation of this is quite simple. You can decay by the percentage there. But as we can talk about in future Hangouts, there's a series of pipelines where you can customize the way that the interaction or the contact behavior profile is decayed. You can also introduce your own set of logic that looks at the distance and time between the most recent interaction. So if I came back to the site 10 days later, then I only want to decay by, say, 9%. If I came back to the website 6 months later, I'm probably not interested in the same type of car, and I want to decay by, say, 50% or something greater.
Mm-hmm. And this is excellent. And just to give the plug back in, this is all about the context, right? This is giving us more context to the interaction, more context to the history, more context to the timeline. Like Todd mentioned, if I'm coming back 6 months later, it's a very different context than perhaps I had 6 months before.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So as I said, we could spend easily 30 minutes on the details of what this feature can do, but I'm going to save that and move on to this next feature. Another feature we've added around personalization for historical behavior is what's called a key behavior cache. This is a cache that collects at the end of each interaction campaigns, goals, all of our major marketing operations and activities, so that we can use the fact that a contact, when they return to the website, entered into a campaign or triggered a goal on one of their previous interactions. There's a lot of tuning capabilities on this cache, and again, that's probably a longer session to go into the details. But in short, we load up a certain number of these entries by default, and then you can use the rules you see on the right there to look at past interactions for that particular contact. A really good example here is when you go to Sitecore.net, if you chose to, say, click the instant demo button, which we had on earlier versions of Sitecore.net, we could store this in this cache. And so the next time you came back to the website, we know specifically which interaction and when you actually looked at instant demo, and we could show personalization based on that very specific activity or event. Now we also support custom values, which means you can extend this yourself to put in your specific key events. I think this is somewhere like our Commerce Connect product would plug in very specific events to them. Say someone decided to abandon a cart, or they entered their cart completely. Next time they come to the website, you could personalize on the fact that they took that activity. We also support a custom value, which is just string data on each individual entry. What's nice about this is if you're a car dealership site, as an example, and someone comes to your website and they search on your website for an Aston Martin, you can store the fact that they triggered the page event search, but then you can also store that they searched for Aston or Aston Martin, whatever that keyword is. And if you look at the bottom of the rule, you can look at the very specific text they search for and show a very specific contextually based ad or banner or whatever you choose on that very precise event they triggered in a previous interaction. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of customizations you can make to this, and we've got a whole talk we can give on that in a later Hangout if you guys are interested in seeing that.
Really good stuff. I think that this is answering and really filling in a lot of gaps, I think, that people may have between an engagement, be it a visit or, like you said, a search, an abandoned cart, things that you may not even be there for it, right? A cart gets abandoned after a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So this is really, I think, filling that gap in timeline and really picking up where we left off each time. This is good stuff, Todd.
Yeah, and the key here for this is that obviously over the course of the lifetime of a customer, you're going to have a massive amount of interaction. Some are relevant, some are not. I've seen customers before load in significant amount of historical data from XDB and run into lots of performance issues because you're querying across so much data. The goal for this cache is to cache the minimal amount that you need so that you get high performance when personalizing on historical data.
Cool.
So just a couple more points here. MongoDB 3.0 support. We introduced this in Update 5, but of course we continue that on forward. And so I'll speak a little bit about it. We upgraded to the Mongo 1.10 driver. That's the version we support out of the box. We did a small amount of testing against the 2.0 driver, but after getting a significant number of compilation errors and looking at the breaking changes within the driver, we decided to start with the 1.10 driver. So that's what you'll see in 8.1 and also 8.0 Update 5. We support the 3 versions of the storage engine you see below. It's actually, it says 3.0.4, but actually we support up to 3.0.6 and continue to test against the newer versions of Mongo. If you're familiar with the Mongo versioning policy, you'll know that the even numbers are their production releases and the odd numbers are their bleeding edges. So we focus on the even numbers. So 3.0.6, and of course when 3.0.8 and further come out, we'll test against those. And one other point here on Mongo. Our interaction with Mongo, or our integration with Mongo itself, in previous versions of Sitecore was focused on just the connection string that you saw in connectionstrings.config, which means from a security or authentication perspective, the only support you had was whatever was supported in the Mongo connection string, and that was pretty much basic auth and very simple authentication. Well, knowing that a lot of us want to integrate into enterprise environments, and we need the ability to authenticate with protocols like Kerberos and certificate-based authentication, we added a simple pipeline here that allows you to interject the creation of the driver at the creation of the driver and set the Mongo settings, which of course allows you to plug in and read a certificate from your certificate store and give that to the Mongo driver itself for authentication. So now what you can do is easily plug in your very specific authentication concerns into this pipeline you see on the screen here. And I think that's it. So with that, I'll give it back to you, Nate.
Excellent. Thanks, Todd. So as Todd teed up, there's a lot coming, and we really want to hear from you guys what you'd like to see in the next Hangouts. Of course, we've got our favorite topics, but after that, it's really up to you guys. These are for you guys. So I'm just going to give a quick reminder here of some of the other topics that we can have. Looking at some of the marketing products or the visitor engagement features. There's a lot here, and you'll see a lot about them again in the news today, but very specifically the geolocation we mentioned. Todd was talking about venue, talking about where the visitor or the consumer is. We can do these things because we now have geolocale as a standard integration service, and device detection is completely integrated. So on the surface, what's the difference between, say, having it outside the product or not may not be as clear, but now when we look at what we can deliver as a part of the Sitecore platform, because these are completely integrated, it becomes a lot more exciting. A lot of exciting improvements in the analytics and experience analytics. The user experience, the UI, has been improved. Lots of new dimensions, new out-of-the-box reports. A campaign creator tool is now standard, making it a lot simpler to connect the different events and triggers you want across the site through the campaign taxonomy. FXM has picked up outcomes and custom data. Content testing path analyzer. Brace yourselves, because here it comes, I believe, from... we're going to do content testing first with Alistair, but stay tuned because Mr. Shiba is going to wrap up at the end with, he's going to wrap up at the end with the path analyzer. So, Alistair, content testing.
Sorry, I was muted. So we've had a fair few updates to content testing in 8.1. A lot of these were based on feedback we got from early adopters, from people that were using it, from our own Sitecore.net team. So they're the guys, of course, that run Sitecore.net. So yeah, it's great that we can deliver on some of the feedback that we've been asked for. So first of all, you can now test without workflow. So there's a new setting in the content testing config file. When you set that to true and you don't have your item in workflow and there's a test candidate available, it will prompt you to say, would you like to create a test around that? We've added the ability to cancel a running test. So previously the only way to stop a test was you had to pick a winner. But when you didn't actually want to complete the test, that wasn't really the right thing to do, because historically it would say the test completed successfully, and this is the winning combination. But no, sometimes you just want a quick get out of jail right now, cancel it. So we've added in that magic button. We're now collecting some personalization data without the need to test it. So this is more around the reach of a personalization rule. This is something that people have been asking for quite a while. You know, I've got my rule set now. How many visitors actually were exposed to that first rule? How many visitors have I got that have an engagement value between 5 and 37, for example? So you don't have to run a test now. You can see that data in the personalization dialog inside the experience editor. We've got the ability to exclude single rules from a personalization test. So in 8.0, we wanted to have this in 8.0, but we kind of ran out of time. In 8.1 now, when you add a rule set into a test, you can remove individual rules from it. So let's say you've got an existing rule set that you know is performing very well, and you've added 2 new rules, and you just want to test the effect those 2 new rules have. So we've now got the ability to do that. We can now run multiple content tests on different languages of the same item. So in 8.0, we're using the page level test set field. This is a shared field, so you can only have 1 test per item. We've now swapped over, we've added a new field, the content test field, and this is what we use for content tests. And when I say content tests, I'm talking about testing one version of an item against another version. So now you can have one of those running in Danish, and one of those in English, and one of those in French. We've had many performance improvements, both in functional areas as well as in the UX. So we've had some specific scenarios that we've investigated and optimized, particularly around personalization testing. It's funny when you get out into the real world and discover how people are actually going to use your product, and you realize that, you know, in design you thought having 1,000 experiences on an item, that's just crazy, and then you realize that that's the first thing that people come up and say, hey, I've got this configuration and it's telling me I've got 1,000 experiences, what's going on? No, that's quite a legitimate actual scenario. Big change, we've moved all the testing functionality into the content testing assembly. So previously it was in the analytics assembly. So we've made sure that we haven't broken anything. We've deprecated everything inside the analytics assembly. We've taken a copy of all of that and shoved it over into the content testing assembly. The main thing here is if you've been writing stuff against the content testing assembly, many of those types have now been updated because we're no longer using the types from analytics, we're now using the new types inside content testing. We've got better test duration forecasting. So there was a couple of scenarios where the test duration forecasting was a bit too simplistic. So especially if you've been setting up very simple tests that only have 2 experiences, you'd be used to the, what was it, 3,460 required sessions for statistical significance, and that's now going to go up to 4,000 or something because we've changed our algorithm in the background. We've also added a screenshot generation disabler switcher. So this is very similar to the event disabler or the security disabler. Now we've got the preemptive screenshot generation handler is an event handler we have to generate the screenshots ahead of time. Generating screenshots is actually quite a laborious task. It's a lot heavier than you expect it to be. You'd think that it's a very quick operation, but it's not. So to speed the UI up, we have a handler that will generate the screenshots ahead of time as the changes are made. The problem is you end up generating a lot more screenshots than you would actually need. We ship with this generation handler disabled to avoid any performance issues. But if you do turn it on, and you're going to be doing a lot of item work, so for example, you've got some kind of automated item processing task or import task or whatnot, wrap your code in a screenshot generation disabler to make sure that the screenshots don't generate for anything that has a test candidate on it. And with that said, back over to you, Nate.
Perfect. So thanks for hanging in there, folks. We got one last exciting topic from Alex Shiba. He's going to talk to us about, introduce some of the Path Analyzer improvements so you guys can tell us what you want to hear in the next one.
All right, thanks, Nate. Well, Path Analyzer, let's talk about this beast. The update in 8.1 includes complete rework of the whole backend system that builds data. That's good news for both the IT folks and for the business users. For the business user, because you see the data straight away, so you don't have to wait a day to see the data and wait for that nightly agent to kick in. For the AT, it means there is less pressure on XDB. There is way more data reuse that's happening. You can use standard rebuild report database process, and that will affect Path Analyzer as well. Used to have a separate process. It's still there if you want to just rebuild Path Analyzer's data historically, but it's much better when there is one rebuild for everyone. So there is way less complexity and more efficiency in this whole process. In terms of efficiency, we also reduced the footprint of those blobs that are stored in RDB. So we started with about 8x compression with protobuf, and we added gzip on top, which gave us additional 4x. So the blobs are kept fairly compact. That allowed us shipping with way more maps out of the box. 41 maps are there, comparing to 7 maps in 8.0. There is way more map types, channel maps, outcome maps, including a map that's called experience map. It's sort of the a la carte option where you have about 7 or 8 checkboxes, I don't remember, where the users can pick what kind of sequences they want to build from XDB. Right? So if they want to not focus on the page sequences, but start with channel, campaign, goal, page event sequence, there's no dev effort. They just check a few boxes and deploy a map, and that's it. On the topic of deployment of a map, which is that entity that you create in a marketing control panel that describes the recipe, how to build a map. This whole life cycle has been complete, so you can create, deploy a map, delete it, all the data will be deleted, restore it from recycle bin, redeploy it, and the data will be repopulated. So that was finally complete. We're using some latest update 4 features of the platform to perform this partial map rebuild. Also, some cool business user feature. I'll show you how that looks in a second. Is this what we've seen is that some databases create quite a lot of noise on the path analysis UI. So one way to reduce that noise is apply the significance filter. So the user will decide how much significant data he or she needs to see. And that filter will just weed out all of the insignificant paths. So your visualization will show only what matters. And there was an update to page analyzer visualization that was done. So let me show you what I mean real quick by data noise. This is the latest 8.1 path analyzer visualization on the Sitecore.net data set. So it shows about quarter mil of visits on the map, and it gets quite busy and it gets even worse. So it's very difficult to read. And there are some examples here of paths with 9 visits, right? So that's really not interesting at all. So there is a quick option here, a checkbox that says show me only the most significant paths. As simple as that, this map transforms into quite readable map with 46 nodes instead of 6,000, right? So it lets you you can read it much better, right? Spot the trends, that sort of thing. This is just an example of those business user-focused, in addition to filtering, the grouping option as well. So I'll be doing more hangouts around Path Analyzer itself because there's a lot to talk about. But this is just a taste of what came out in 8.1. Great. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you, guys. All right, so a lot on the store today. We got a few questions coming in. First one is the overall performance. Alistair mentioned some new pipelines. I think Todd did as well. How have we done on performance adding the new pipelines?
So I haven't got any hard numbers or anything. We weren't bashed by the independent QA group, so we mustn't have done too bad. There is an independent testing group within Sitecore that checks all of that kind of thing, performance, make sure that we haven't broken things, all that kind of thing. And yeah, they haven't come back and said you've broken it. Will be quite interesting to analyze the performance changes across the versions. Of course, you know, any kind of analysis is always quite loaded because you've got many factors involved in what can determine the outcome. But I mean, I can't say that I've noticed a difference. Guys, have you got any other input?
Yeah, I'll speak from the pipelines we've added in that run at the beginning of a contacts session. We've introduced those in order to save on all the other issues from a performance perspective, because we pull the data in for you during the session or at the beginning of the session so that you don't have to query it during the session. So those, you have a minor hit to your collection data store or MongoDB to load in that cache, the key behavior cache I talked about, for example. But that's actually designed specifically to increase performance by taking the hit up front. As far as the other pipelines we've added, they run at the end of the session when the contact is not on the website. This is after the session's ended, they've gotten their car and they're driven home, as an example. So the performance impact should be I should say 0, unless your key behavior cache is somewhere around 10 megabytes, then you have problems. But then it's just misdesigned.
If I can add just brief thought on the get field pipeline. That's a new pipeline. It's very performance critical. So we've done a lot of micro level optimizations around that. Think about removing an extra assert that made the difference. So that means, I mean, there was a lot of calls going on to resolve the field value even for a single item. Imagine item with hundreds of fields, right? So it's really critical to have that pipeline, specific pipeline, be absolutely optimized. So the good news is that the work has been done around that area. Again, we have refactored the underlying provider that was going to standard values, going to template default fields to result field value. If you wanted to, you can even disable those and even get a boost out of it. We haven't tried it. I would not recommend doing that at home, but it's still an option. And I believe there will be some numbers coming out of Q8 comparison, sort of apple to apple, 8.0.8.1. So that sounds like a great follow-up for a blog post or something. But that get field pipeline, just want to make it clear, if you're gonna extend it and use it for all sorts of integration scenarios, be very careful, and you have to have super optimized code in there so you don't slow down the content delivery process and content management as well.
Super. So thanks. One other, two other questions, excuse me, coming in. One is about area support, and if that made it into 8.1 or if that's still being looked at for a next follow-up.
No, it absolutely made it in, and it's an oversight that is not listed on the regionals. So we'll have the regionals updated.
Well played. Thank you. One other question is about multi-time zone publishing off of one installation, and if that's something that we're still looking at in this release, or if that's something that's going to come out in an update afterwards, or if we still require multiple installations for multiple time zones. My guess is I didn't see it in the notes, but I think it's something that we're looking at in the post 8.1 follow-up, but if someone else. Yeah.
Likely that setting that controls the time zone is still shared per installation, but I think the question touched on the controlling that per site level, which I think is a very interesting thought. It's definitely something to bring up.
I can say this is an area that we're definitely have under consideration, but this specific one's not addressed in 8.1.
Good. Well, that's good to know. I mean, now we know that there's something we're looking at, and it's good to know that the community is asking about it. Quickly, we will, again, I want to thank everyone for their patience today. If you really, I know it's always tough to believe, but literally the emails that we're sending out to the fabulous cast we have right now were inaccurate, so they couldn't join. So if you saw me standing there, wrinkled brow, trying to drink coffee, that was what was going on. So appreciate the patience and really appreciate the questions. So what's next for us? And again, as Alistair mentioned out as well, everyone that's helped us with this launch, again, from the very first bit of research to the Lighthouse program, the early adopters, the beta customers that were at Symposium, downloading 8 and helping us to get what we needed to prioritize for 8.1. All of the engineers on all the teams that you guys have here represented, thank you. So go ahead and take a look at it, download it. Give us some tough questions for the next Hangout. Let us know what it is you'd like to go deeper into. We really are excited to do more of these. Folks have been asking for them, and we are glad to be back. So here's just some preliminary plans for the next Hangouts. As Alex mentioned, language fallback. We can have Todd take us through XDB, deeper into Path Analyzer. Kern mentions that we can look at Speak and what we're delivering in 8.1 and what we're planning in 8.2. And of course, the experience marketing capabilities. But most importantly, thank you, and tell us what you are interested in most. This will be up on the YouTube site under Sitecore's account. And again, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Alistair. It's just for the record, I think it's about 2:30 tomorrow for Alistair in Australia, so thank you for that, and apologies to your family if they're looking for you.
Very right. Thank you.
Kern, thank you. Welcome aboard.
You're welcome.
Likewise for Ryan, welcome aboard. And Todd, it's great to have you guys on. We have some fantastic expertise, and the next time we will be much smoother. So thanks again, all.
Thanks, Nate.